Hey creative friends, welcome to my channel. In this video, I really didn't plan to make this video, but my son, you know what time it is, we'll just say that. It is tuna time. It's time here on the Pacific Northwest for tuna. And so our son was asking me, he wanted to show a friend of his the video that I did of canning tuna, and I realized it's 10 years old. So I need to update it. So yesterday, I actually helped with a workshop where we help people learn how to can tuna, and I got 8.5 pounds of tuna fillets that I need to can. I got these specifically to make this video. And I have to tell you, 8.5 pounds of tuna fillets is the smallest amount of tuna I have ever canned. I have canned up to 150 pounds of tuna at one time, and I'll tell you what, that took more than one day. We'll just say that. But what I want to do with this video, I want to update. I mean, the information's basically the same, but I just feel like I can give you some more information and just make it maybe more up to date. I don't know. Anyway, so I've got my tuna. I've got my pressure canner. You can see it back there on the stove, and there's the lid. I've got that going because tuna is a low acid food and has to be pressure canned. And I'm going to say this about 3 times, but it's important. Tuna needs to process in a pressure canner at the proper pressure for your altitude. We are at sea level, so my pressure is 11 pounds on a dial or 10-pound weighted gauge. Either one you can use. And it has to go for 100 minutes. I hear all the time people say, oh, we've only done it for 90 minutes, or, you know, other ways of processing it. But tuna needs to process for 100 minutes. That's 2 times I've said it. I'll say it another time, I'm sure. And the other thing I want to say before I forget, if you want to can smoked tuna, that can be done as well. But if you're going to smoke your tuna, you don't smoke it like you're smoking tuna. What you do is you only smoke it for like a couple of hours. All you want to do is impart the smoked flavoring onto the fish. You don't actually want to smoke it all the way through. The reason is because the smoking dries the fish out. So even with that 2-hour smoke just to get the flavor on there, and trust me, that is plenty, because when you can things, the flavor intensifies. So that 2-hour smoke touch is just fine, but you do have to bump up the processing time to 110 minutes. That 10 minutes covers the fact that that smoking has actually reduced the moisture in the fish. It's dried out a portion of the fish. So it's going to take longer for the heat to penetrate and stay penetrated long enough for it to be a safe product. So that's that. So I want to get those out of the way before I forget. Now, I am going to can my tuna in half-pint jars, and it works out to about a half a pound per half pint, and so that's like a pound a pint. But I got to tell you, a pint of tuna is a lot, and a half a pint is this size jar. And when you're done, it's a good amount of tuna. It's like those big cans of tuna, not the little cans of tuna, but the big cans. So there's plenty in one of those. Unless you're really into it and you're making a whole lot of like tuna patties or stuff like that. I find for me, half pints are fine, and it's just me and Brian, so I don't need pints of tuna. Anyway, so I'm going to get things set up, and I'm going to come back to you, and I'm going to show you simplest process ever. One of my favorite things. If you watch any of my ugly chicken videos of how to can chicken, it's exactly the same thing. You just take it, you put it in the jar, you leave the right amount of headspace, you put the lid on, and you process it for what? 100 minutes. That's 3 times. Anyway, so let me get things set up, and then I'll come back. All right, I've got my tuna fillets, and there was some pieces left, and this is actually extra that was from the workshop. When they have extra, they let you buy it, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to get that, and I'm going to do this video. So I've got my half-pint jar. I have some vinegar in this bowl because that's what I'm going to use to wipe the top of the rim when I'm ready to put the top on. You want to make sure your rim is super clean because that lid will not seal to it if it's not. I've got my flat lids right here in this little jar, and you need to read the information that comes with your lids, because some of them will tell you, older ones used to have you boil them. The newer ones, you don't have to, but check it out. Let me put this where you can see it a little bit better. And one thing I like to do is use a little, like a baking dish to put everything in, because that way it stays here, because tuna is oily, and it's just nice to keep everything contained. Secondly, oftentimes you'll see the recipes or the guide that will tell you to pre-cook your tuna. We're in the Pacific Northwest. I don't know anybody that does that because ours actually has quite a bit of oil. And you'll see, I'm going to pack the tuna all by itself in here. And when it comes out, you're going to see this is going to be almost half full of that amazing fish oil that comes out of it. So super simple. I've got my pressure canner ready. I've got about 4 inches of water. Usually they say 2 to 3 inches in a pressure canner, but I have about 4 because this is going to go for how long? 100 minutes. Hold on and I'll show you my pressure canner. Okay, there you have it. So this is an old pressure canner. This was my grandma's, but as long as you take care of them, they'll last like forever. I've got my jars in there. I've got some jars in there because I wanted to gauge how many. I know that 8 will go in there, but not only that, I will have about 16 jars, and you can stack these. Once you get the first row in, you have to put a trivet in there, and then you can stack the next set of jars on with those great big 23-quart like Prestos, the big ones. You can get 3 stack tall. So that's what it looks like when I'm all prepped, and now I'm going to go fill the jars. Okay, here I am. And you know, it was super fun yesterday. I'm just going to show you how I cut this. Oh, by the way, it needs to have an inch head space. I've got one of these cool tools that has 1/4, 1/2, 3/4, and 1 inch. And if you put this in the edge, it goes just a little bit below. You can see where that comes just below the bottom rim. And actually, you can see underneath there, there's like an indentation around. But if you measure it, you kind of get an idea. There's some people that will measure every single jar. I just put it on there and kind of get myself a little eyeball gauge of where the tuna needs to go. So just right below the bottom rim of the neck of the jar, and then I will have the proper headspace. And why do you worry about headspace? I'm just going to use these bits for this jar. You worry about headspace because in the processing, the whatever you're cooking or canning will actually expand. If you don't have the right headspace, if you have too little headspace, that food will push against the top of the jar and ooze out, and then that will be on the rim of the jar and it won't seal. Or if you don't have enough, you may not expel all of the air. The jar may still seal, but it's not got all the air out of it, so it's not a proper seal. So there's another thing too. There's some people that will take a ring like this and screw it on there to put their meat in there, and then they don't get as much around the ring, or you could even put a funnel in. But you know what? I'm a fly by the seat of my pants kind of gal. So I am just going to put this in there. And do I want to keep it in nice big chunks? You can. It doesn't matter because it's going to cook down. And you're still going to have some nice bits. But I'm going to tell you what. If you've never had home canned tuna, oh my goodness. It is the best. Okay. So now I've got that in there. I've pressed it down. I'm going to give a little look and see those little air pockets. I'm going to take my finger and I'm going to push the fish down into those to get rid of those air pockets. And that's going to give me a little bit room for a little bit more tuna. And that's what you do. It's just this simple. And do you need to sterilize your jars? No, because we're pressure canning. Sterilization of the jars takes about 10 minutes in boiling water. Okay, so if you're boil water canning something, which is not tuna, but if you're boil water canning something and the process is longer than 10 minutes, you don't have to sterilize your jars because they're sterilized in the first 10 minutes of the process. If you're pressure canning something, the heat gets so high that you don't have to sterilize your jars in there either. Okay, so I've got that in there. A couple of little bits. I'm going to get the air out. This is so simple. Now you could, I've seen people that make really pretty jars because they'll line up little lemons around the outside, couple lemon slices and make it look cool. Or I've put in a little bit, maybe a tablespoon of salsa, because remember, those flavors intensify in the process. So a little salsa. If you're doing this with pork, same thing. You could even put a little barbecue sauce in there and make like pulled pork right out of the jar. So cool. But there you have it. I've got this in there. Oop, there's a nice big pocket of air. I'm going to get those down in there. There we go. There we go. That's even perfect. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my vinegar and I'm going to give the rim of this jar a good wipe. If you feel any chips out of that jar neck, this edge, you need to get a new jar, because if there's chipped, the seal will not seal to it. So you want to make sure you're getting a good seal. So I always do this because I hate to lose a jar of tuna. Tuna is not cheap. And I want to make sure I've got a good lid on there. Good seal. Now I'm going to pull this. My little magnet thing isn't the best. This one is not very strong. Okay, got that on there. I'm going to put my ring on there, and the ring goes on just fingertip type, which means you get to where you feel the resistance and then you come back a little bit. Why? Because if you cramp that down on there so tight, the air can't evacuate, and then what's going to happen is the air is eventually going to force its way out, and you're going to buckle the lid. You're going to literally see like a big buckle in it so that the air could escape, and then that jar is ruined. If you make it too loose, too much, you'll get too much, you know, it won't seal properly. So you want to bring it around to where it just stops and you feel the resistance, and then just come back a little bit. That leaves it so it's loose enough for the air to force out, and then it can still seal. So now I'm going to go over and I'm going to go ahead and fill all the rest of these jars and put them in the canner, and then I'll bring you back and show you my loaded canner. You know, I just did that jar for you, and I used some little stray bits here. And then I did the next jar, and I wanted to show you how easy it is when you just have your fillet. You can also just take your fillet like this. When it's little bits like this, you pack it into the jar until you get to your headspace. With this, you can kind of get yourself a little gauge from the height of the jar, and then just cut the fillet, see there, and pop it in there. Then the other one, I think that might be a little tall, but woo, my knife's getting slippery. And then you can just fit that in there, and then you have a fabulous jar with just two nice pieces of fillet. There you are. There's a little bit of skin right there. I want to get that out. I don't like the skin in there. Don't use a knife in your jar. I'm not scraping the glass. I'm just pulling this off the meat. And when you use metal against the inside of a jar, it can create little micro scratches, and those micro scratches can cause a fault where this will fail in the canning process. Your jar could actually crack, fall apart. I've lifted a jar out one time and the bottom was right off of it. Anyway, so there you have it. See how perfect that is? And that's just two nice pieces of fillet stuck in there next to each other. I just wanted to show you that. Okay, while I'm doing these, I figured I'd give you a little bit more information. So if you are, this is a stinky process. Get the windows of your house open, the cats in your neighborhood will come a-running. But if you want to do this outside where you don't have the smell in the house, which I don't find it to be terrible. Oh, that leads me to another tip, see? One of the reasons I don't find it to be terrible is because, like having vinegar in here to wipe the oil off of the jar, put some vinegar in your pressure canner in the water, and that will help with the, it'll actually help with the jar, you know, staying cleaner, and it helps with the smell. So that's kind of a good idea. So you can do that. But if you're going to process this outside on one of the outside propane burners, you want to make sure that your burner is one of the kind that you can adjust the flame. Like you can literally, the best thing are those camp stoves that there's two burners in, and the reason is you want to adjust your flame, because if you can't adjust your flame and it gets too hot on the bottom, it will actually just completely ruin your canner. And trust me, it happens. I've known people that it happened to because the flame gets so hot. You want to be able to adjust it the same way you would on a gas stove. I mean, that's the deal. You need to adjust it so your pressure stays the right for your altitude. Now, speaking of that, I'm just trying to give you guys all the information because I'm updating everything from 10 years ago. You need to check your altitude for what pressure. If you're using a weighted gauge, which is my preference, you're at sea level. We process at 10 pounds on a weighted gauge. Weighted gauges will come in three different weights, 5, 10, and 15 pounds, okay? So ours is a 10 pound at sea level. If you're higher than that, you'll go up, well, it depends, you need to check your altitude, but you could go up to 15 pounds. If you're using a dial gauge at sea level, it is 11 pounds. And then up from there in 1 pound increments based on your altitude. So you'll want to make sure that you check your altitude and look at a canning. You can go to the USDA National Center for Home Food Preservation if you want a real good information on altitude and things like that. But be sure and keep your pressure adjusted based on your altitude. Now, here's the thing I get asked all the time. People say, how come it's 10 pounds on a weight but 11 pounds on a dial? That's a good question, and I have a good answer. When the pressure builds up in the pressure canner, it actually builds up to like 10.5 pounds of pressure. That additional pressure is what pushes the weight up, and it'll go psh, that's where it will release the steam. This is why I like a weighted gauge, because when it's making noise, and mine will kind of rocks back and forth like a little hula dancer and goes ch 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 ch, is because the pressure is high enough to lift it up and exhaust, and lift it up and exhaust. And as long as that's happening, then I know it's at the right temperature or the right pressure. It's not going too high and it's not below. With a dial, you have to look, and I find myself just obsessed by watching the dial constantly, and so I don't like that. So I like to use the weight. But if you look at a dial and it says, boy, this is a terrible magnet, and it says 11 pounds. Well, like I said, the weight is 10.5 pounds is what lifts the weight. Well, on those dials, you can't really put little half-pound increments on the dial because it's way tiny. I'll show you what I'm talking about in case you've never seen it. So here's your weight. And with this one is a Presto, it's a 3-piece weight. That is 5 pounds. This makes it 10 pounds. When this goes on here, when the steam builds up, the pressure will lift it and it will exhaust, psh, like that. Psh, and so every time it's doing that, you know that it's staying at 10 pounds. See how tiny those marks are? It's easier to go up to just 11, to watch 11, than it is to try to find the 10.5 pound mark. So that's why that's done that way. And then once we actually get these in the canner, we're going to turn it on and bring it up to a boil. Steam is going to begin coming out of that little vent that I put that weight on. And you want to let that steam, a good column of steam, come out for 10 minutes. The reason that happens is because it is a mixture of air and steam in the canner. And that mixture will create cold pockets. So you want to make sure that it's exhausted long enough to push all of those pockets of air out so there's nothing but steam inside. So that's really important to do. Now, I'm going to keep working, and if I think of something else I think you need to know or I forgot to tell you, I'm going to come back to you. But I got to stop touching my phone because I got tuna on my gloves. Okay, so you can see that I have the 8 jars in here, the half pints. Now I want to do another row, so I've got to set some sort of a divider here. So I'm just going to use this other trivet, I guess you'd call it, for the canner. And now I'm going to set the jars on top of them. And is it okay that those bottom ones are covered with water? Yes, it's fine. Don't worry about it. This is going to be just fine. So now I did that. And here's a little bit more information I just thought of. What if I can't get this all canned today, or I get it and I'm not ready to can it until the next day? Can you freeze, or you've done a whole bunch of fishing and you just want to freeze it and can it later? Can you do that? You bet you can. All you have to do is freeze it, and when you're ready to can it, just make sure that it's thoroughly thawed before you can it. So you just want to make sure it's all thawed out. If you're getting it fresh off the dock, you want to make sure that you keep it on ice really, really cold until you can get home, put it in your fridge, and then, yep, you can freeze it and then can it later. Also, add-ins, you can put in a little bit of salt, about up to a teaspoon of salt in each half pint. And just letting you know that I'm canning this in half pints. Most of your directions will be for pints, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you're doing pints. You don't need to do more time. If you're doing half pints, you don't use less time. You do it for 100 minutes. So there it is. I probably said that 5 times now, haven't I? Okay, so I'm going to keep working. Okay, here's some more information. If for some reason a lid did not seal, First of all, when you take it out of the canner, you want to make sure that you take it straight up and straight down. Don't tip it because those oils can get in between the seal and the lid, and you don't want that to happen. But if it sits out there and 24 hours goes by and it hasn't sealed, you can take the top off, clean the top and put a whole new lid on, and you can reprocess that for any canning really, for 24 hours. As long as it's done within 24 hours, you're still safe. And why does that happen? Like you're thinking that food's been out on my counter for 24 hours. This is why. So you have this food sitting here on the counter. This food already has the bacteria on it to grow, and it takes, within, they always say 4 hours is when this bacteria has developed to the point that it's going to make you sick. Could be even before that, since we're talking fish or mayonnaise or that kind of stuff. So it's already ready to go. Well, once you process something in a canner, it has processed to the point that's really killed all the bacteria that even start. So it's going to take that period of time in that jar for that bacteria to even develop, to then develop into what makes you sick. So that's why you have 24 hours to reprocess something. Anything really, as long as you do it. If not, put it in the fridge. Have yourself maybe a tuna melt for dinner that night, or you can also just put your jar in the freezer. So you can do that. So I hope I'm trying to give you guys a bunch of information. These are questions I feel like people ask a lot in our workshops, or just me in general. So there you go. And if you have a question, feel free to email me or message me, and I'll be happy to answer it. Okay, I've got everything jarred up, and I actually probably will have another 6 or so jars left, but I'm just doing this one canner load right now, and then I will do another one once it's done. So this is why I wanted to show you why I like to put everything on this, because now super easy to clean up my mess. Okay, so I'm gonna put this over by the sink. I'm gonna take my gloves off, and I'm gonna take you over and show you my loaded canner. All right, now you can see that's double stacked, and I'm going to put the lid on. So this goes on this way. I'll turn it around. So I'm putting this on, and I'm going to bring it to high heat. There it is, my gasket and everything. And I made sure to look through there to make sure that that is clear so it doesn't get blocked. Now I'm going to turn it up on high, and I'm going to let it steam start. Well, for this one I got to turn it around this way, because the steam, I don't want it to hit the bottom of my microwave, because you will melt your door. I know this because it happened to me. So I'm going to wait for steam to come out of there, and then I'm going to let the steam continuously come out for 10 minutes. Then I will put the weight on and let it get to pressure where your dial gauge would say 11. Your weight for me at sea level will be 10. When that starts moving, that's when I'll send the time for 100 minutes. Okay, I think you can see the steam coming out. I'll hold this. You can see that steam. You need to have that going for 10 minutes because it's going to release all the cold pockets that are in the canner. And you'll have one of these little, this is a little pressure release gauge that will blow if the pressure gets too high. And that's okay for that to kind of be moving around, and even a little bit of water. And if you have a newer canner, you might have a little metal button that pops up. It's okay for bubbles of steam and stuff to be around that, because eventually it's going to push that up to lock the lid. And so this is going to go for 10 minutes, and then we're going to put the weight on. All right, that has processed. Alexa, stop. For 10 minutes. Now I'm going to put the lid on there, the weight on there. I like to turn it around because I can see the gauge, but I can listen for the weight. And then as soon as that weight starts rocking, going psh, 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 then I know I can set the time for 100 minutes. So that's what I'm going to do. As soon as this starts, if you're using a gauge, as soon as your gauge at sea level where I'm at, or whatever altitude you're at, as soon as it gets up to 11, then I will know I'm at the right time, or the right pressure on my gauge. As soon as this starts rocking, I know that that's 10 pounds of pressure, and I can set my timer for 100 minutes. So that's what I'm going to do, and I will bring you back when the whole process is finished. Now, as you can see, this is just coming along just fine, and I want to show you, I don't know if you can actually see, I said that you started off on a higher temperature because you want that steam to vent, but with this canner, I turn it all the way down. You just want to maintain, now see, my gauge is correct, so I watch my gauge, but as long as that is wiggling, I know that it's fine. If my gauge happened to be off, this is my safety net. And this is also just for me because I can walk around the kitchen and things, and as long as I hear that, I know we're fine regardless. But I can turn this canner down. My other canner goes to about 7. This one can go to about 6. Once it's going, you don't want to leave it on high or this will go up. It will just get crazy. It's too hot. So you want to just keep it to where you're maintaining that. Now, if for some reason this went all the way down, or it stopped jiggling, or it went down on your dial to below the pressure that you're required, you need to get it back up to pressure and start the 100 minutes completely over again. You can't just like catch up. It actually, the process needs to start again because the temperature will have gone down enough that the botulism takes 100 minutes to kill, won't be dead, and it won't have enough time to be killed. So that's why you do that. Anyway, this is what's happening. Now, when the 100 minutes goes off, I'm going to turn the heat off. You can remove it from the heat, but this is too heavy for me. So I'm just going to turn it off to 0 and let it sit until the dial goes all the way back to 0. And if I'm not using the dial, that stops. And I can tell if you very slightly touch it, there's no noise, there's no steam coming out, and it's gone to 0. Then what we're going to do is I will take the top and open it away from myself so the steam doesn't come at me, and let those sit for a couple minutes. I usually leave them about 5 minutes before I remove them. That way the atmosphere in there can adjust, because if you move the jar from too hot to too cool too quickly, you'll get siphoning. So that's where I'm going to leave you until this thing is done. All right, the tuna is out of the canner, and I want you to see a couple things. See the oil? That is from that tuna. That is the best fish oil ever, so don't throw this out. You can always use this to give one of your pets. Dogs love it. It's really good. It is the best fish oil. So that came straight out of the dry tuna that we just canned without adding any liquid. That's raw packing. So if you actually, that's why we like to raw pack it, because if you cook it, you cook the oils out, and then you have to put it in the jar, and then you have to add liquid to it. So why do that? Just get the original awesome fish oil. Secondly, we're going to set them here, and you might see here on this one here, there's a little bit of water. I'm not tipping that off when I take them out of the canner. Look at that one back there, really bubbling hard. I'm not taking that off when I take them out of the canner. I'm not tipping it because I don't want any of that oil to get up under the edge of that flat lid and the jar, or it'll prevent the seal. Now, most of these have already sealed. They've already popped, but you'll hear pop every once in a while. It'll just go pop, and you'll know that that seal went down. And also, you might see some darkening, like around this one here, you can see some darkening. And if you take the lid off, sometimes you'll see some black spots on the inside of the lid. That's fine. What happens is in the processing, sometimes some of that oil, the steam is very hot, and it can scorch, and that will make those black spots. So they're perfectly fine. So when you see that, don't worry about it. But isn't that awesome? So I have 16 half pints, which is like 16 really nice cans of amazing fresh caught home canned tuna. So I hope that this video helped you. I hope I gave you a little bit of information, even if you're a seasoned tuna canner. Maybe I gave you something informational that you didn't already know. So anyway, there it is. Awesome home canned tuna. Here's my updated video, and as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Okay.